Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar series titled AuditPro, HBX, a new tool for operational compliance in the cannabis industry. Thank you to Heidolph and AuditPro for sponsoring today's webinar. Throughout today's webinar, please ask your questions in the question box found in the toolbar to the right. We will be answering these at the end of the presentation. As many of you know, Heidolph's HBX division is focused on the needs of cannabis processing and also offering a full line of automated solutions for solvent recovery, decarboxylation, stirring and mixing, and liquid transfer. Over the course of 5 years serving the cannabis industry, many of our customers have expressed concerns about the safety and operational compliance of their processes in facilities, and today we'll be discussing with AuditPro HBX, a new tool for maintaining compliance in your processing facilities, cultivation sites, or retail dispensaries. AuditPro is an innovative tool that gives you the ability to conduct your own audits in accordance with the local and federal regulations. So without further ado, I'm going to go on to the next slide where I can give you the bio of our presenters today. So starting off, we have Jehan Marcoux, PhD. He has over 15 years of experience in the cannabinoid research, policy, and operations. He has been a passionate advocate focused on consumer safety and the medical benefits of cannabis. In addition, today we have Tony Martinez. Tony is a Senior Vice President and General Manager of AuditPro, where he's responsible for strategy and operations of product sales and customer success. In the cannabis industry, Tony has helped companies utilize software to set up safety and compliance programs that reduce the risk of non-compliance. Tony has also worked with the states to help them gather and analyze data that drives education and supports additional programs to improve overall safety of the cannabis industry. Now I'll be kicking it over to Jehan to start us off with the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the cannabis industry from a little bit different perspective than you're used to. And much like looking at a cannabis flower under the microscope at 400x, it might look a certain way, but if you go in 1000x, it might look unfamiliar. And I couldn't help but include this other Willy Wonka slide that makes a little bit of an OSHA joke, but you would hope at a facility that people exposed to your products or your workplace wouldn't turn blue, get stuck in a machine, shrink, or be really high up in the ceiling or other issues. So we're going to explore some of these facilities, real world pictures and examples, and discuss some of the ways to avoid OSHA violations and related issues. So there has been a little bit of research in this space, and starting with the American Journal of Industrial Medicine, they surveyed employees at facilities. And what was remarkable is that there isn't a lot of standardized training that was observed. Some participants in the study reported that they received no specific training for safety and health, and problems were just sort of handled basically after they occurred, or they just flat out received no safety and health training for their position. We see a lot of potentially unstructured or maybe elaborate one-time training or brief training, and this could be an issue. And so there are more solutions needed for addressing this issue. So over the last several years, I've had the pleasure and somewhat risky job of going to facilities and either helping them prepare for a regulatory inspection or sometimes training their employees to be ready for internal compliance assessments. Now, the pictures on the right are from a facility that unfortunately was closed and is no longer operating. But some of these in these pictures, we can explore a concept such as pesticide exposure. In the top two pictures, you can see faintly two different shirtless men running around the cultivation operation doing their job. What was surprising is they were notified a week in advance that I would be there at that day at that time. There was actually pesticides applied as per guidelines that were available for the industry. However, there's no PPE, and there's obviously a skin and perhaps lung exposure to anything that was applied to those plants within a given window. Another issue that's common with cultivation operations is the inspection of CO2 tanks or carbon dioxide tanks and things like that used to enhance the growth of the plants and the storage of those tanks, as well as we'll see an issue with other operations, the storage of disinfectants and other chemicals. But perhaps the most common issue that I have encountered in my years are electrical issues. Now, on the bottom left with the wood paneling, you see an exposed wire leading into the electrical box, and that wire was actually leading across a floor and across a couple rooms. Extremely dangerous and not appropriate. To the right of that, this may look like a common, maybe your garage looks like this, but you're on the lower right hand corner, but your workplace should not. You should not be permanently using extension cords. Electrical objects and machines should not be blocking pathways to entrances, exits, or access to places where you have to work, such as watering plants or applying pesticides or things like this. All of this can lead to injuries as well as fines. When it comes to manufacturing and processing extraction operations, there can be a number of issues. Now, the animated GIF at the bottom left is actually not from a cannabis operation, but it is from a school, and there are two distracting things going on. One is the woman using the power tool to adjust a seat with sparks just flying all over dangerous places, as well as her colleague on the right sawing something above his leg. So again, this, are these people protecting themselves during this? Are they wearing proper gear? I don't think we're, using machines and wearing open-toed sandals with hammers and screwdrivers laying around is such a good idea. On the top right, this is perhaps the scariest thing I've ever encountered, was a bunch of gas tanks not secured and also being used as a coat rack. These are, extremely dangerous things. If they get knocked over and the nozzle breaks, they can fly around the room, injuring people and going through walls. And an acceptable response is not, don't worry, most of them are empty, we think. So again, this is a very common area for compliance because it's easy to overlook some of these issues. On the left side, we see a bunch of tanks of ethanol stored with a drying oven. This is a bad photo op. Ethanol should be stored where you store such chemicals. And in the bottom right, just to give you an example, we see a flammable cabinet, and just to the left of that, we see the ethanol stored outside of it, a pure flammable solvent. And much like cultivation operations, electrical is a big issue, but with the manufacturing and processing extraction operations, the most common issues identified in my experience have been with the chemical storage and the storage of gas tanks. Retail operations can seem relatively straightforward. And some of the most common things you'll see reported is that there are issues about when product is being disposed of and tracking that. There's also issues with mislabeled products, which really comes down to inventory control system discrepancies. But one of the most simple things to identify and often overlooked is the place clean and orderly? Well, hopefully. And if you have a clean and orderly operation, it's much less likely you'll have a chance of having an inventory control system discrepancy. And as you can see, I think objectively, you would not call this a clean and orderly operation. Also, there is some electrical issues. You should not be using extension cords as permanent solutions. So this represents, I think, not only a tripping hazard, but an electrical hazard for employees. So should you daisy chain? No. Now, all operators face a lot of issues. Now, the picture in the bottom right of the gentleman hanging the sign, that it's not from a cannabis operation. And part of the reason I included some of these other images in this presentation is to show you that the issues that are affecting the cannabis industry actually affect all industries. They all have a challenge of chemical storage, making sure the electrical stuff is up to date and safe, and as well as disinfectant and corrosive chemical storage. Now you can see in the bottom left picture a lot of chemicals being stored. And these are in sealed containers. But the concern is, if you look at the floor, there's clearly precipitation, some erosion there, And this is an issue. It means chemicals are being mixed. There's a reaction occurring, probably some acids and bases being mixed there, and you really don't want that. Those will corrode metal. If an employee is exposed to that, it could definitely cause some skin irritation, chemical burns, or they could track around that stuff all around the operation. In the top right, we have a retail facility with the doors blocked by a lot of boxes, and you can see an electrical cable running in the middle of the door. And this is a high traffic area. And just to the right of that, you can see a little red sign, and that was a safety sign telling people to watch their step. But again, it was obscured and put behind something. So I think the thing to emphasize here is that these situations we're talking about are not unique to the cannabis and hemp industry. And there are tried and true strategies to address and prevent these issues. So one of the most important aspects facing any operator is workplace exposure. So hopefully you don't walk into your break room or a work area as a manager and you see your coworkers looking like the crew of the Starship Enterprise. So again, always think OSHA. And another way to think about it is think good photo op. A lot of things I showed you were just terrible photo opportunities. Worker safety and exposure is related to maybe pesticides used on site. Pesticides use is a very broad category, but it's often essential for agricultural practice and keeping products, um, to meet specifications for mold, bacteria, and other things. Solvents and other chemicals, whether they're cleaning supplies or, rubbing alcohol, need to be stored properly and according to their specifications. Another workplace exposure could be cannabis and its products. If you're using equipment that's not fit for purpose or there isn't proper PPE available, accidental exposure or ingestion can occur. And that could represent another issue if an employee is accidentally exposed and intoxicated at work. And so you really want to be careful about this. But also, the purpose of having PPE and these other things is not only to protect your employees from what's going on the work site, but to also protect the products, such as the cannabis and hemp products, from the employees as well. Additives are also a health concern. We talk a lot about terpenes and them being generally regarded as safe, but that's only for oral ingestion and not across the board for all of them. They are not generally regarded as safe for inhalation across the board, such as cinnamon oil, like a cinnamon extract, a rich terpene-rich extract. That is great, sort of natural pesticide to spray on plants, but you still are going to want to wear a PPE suit. You don't want to get it on your clothes or your skin. It's very sticky, and you definitely don't want to inhale it. And as we know, if you work in, say, a vape pen manufacturing area, propylene glycol does have some issues when it's overheated and what it's converted to. And so it's very important to have the proper controls in place and really think about, is this a good photo op? And are my workers going to be potentially exposed to any issues here? Now, PPE, personal protective equipment, is something that's oftentimes not taken seriously. As you can see, these are not from cannabis operations. These are pretty famous examples of the great PPE fails. You see that hat on the gentleman with a lot of hair. Now that haircut is very well protected, but his brain is not. And so that to me would be a significant issue. Now, the more hazardous potential, the more risky, the more PPE you want to wear. And you definitely don't want to wear it in and out of the lab. Just simply, if you wear a lab coat and you go and you're doing lab work, you don't want to take that lab coat out into the break room. Who knows what you're tracking there? Likewise, if you were spraying pesticides in a bright yellow Tyvek suit with a gas mask, you wouldn't wear that into the break room or into a common area because you would just be potentially tracking that stuff everywhere. And that's, some of the issues around PPE is keeping employees safe from risks presented at the workplace, but also preventing the spread of contamination. And there's also some other concerns. As you can see in the bottom picture, everyone's in these, these suits that I like to refer to as how to scare your neighbors. But this gentleman is just kind of sitting there in Bermuda shorts and a short sleeve t-shirt. Like, what's going on here? And so definitely think about how, your public image here and concern for your community can play a significant role. So, in a nutshell, there are some basic things that apply to all industries. And I'd like to share a quote from Karen Wetterhahn, who was a renowned toxicologist and safety expert who, despite taking all available precaution, was exposed to mercury and ended up passing away prematurely. But she left a big impact on the safety world. And one of her best quotes is, "Sometimes it's hard to predict the long-term consequences of doing something. You don't always have the knowledge you need. You have to make your best judgment." And that includes understanding the hazards to the best of your ability before you begin, determining what protective measures could be taken, and being consistent in your application and use of those protective measures, and not taking shortcuts. Taking all available precautions and labeling things. Label, label, label. Label shelves, label products. Put instructions everywhere. And report all incidences, no matter big or small. The point is, not to get someone fired, but to keep everyone safe. And maybe something happening once isn't a big issue, but as incidents happen over and over and over again, it might be a sign of perhaps a system failure or an operating procedure needs to be adjusted. And always dispose of materials properly. This gets back into, do not take shortcuts. Dispose of materials properly. Waste is a big issue with cross-contamination and safety. So here are some things you should be doing now and thinking about now as far as inspections and corrections. Training your employees on things regularly. Don't just do the 1 hour required by the state, in my professional opinion. You want to go above and beyond that and train people for the specific hazards they might face in their job. Ergonomic work plans are also important to make sure that employees are safe and not going to injure themselves, say when they're working in a warehouse unloading and loading docks. Also, lighting and physical hazards. You want to make sure there's proper lighting there and that physical hazards are addressed. Do you have a forklift that's operating at the space? Is everyone trained on what to do if the forklift is driving around and operating at the facility? And also paying attention to the indoor air quality. A lot of cultivation operations have really good quality control procedures in place, but it's always good to make sure you're addressing mold, allergens, and other indoor air quality concerns, as well as looking at state and federal requirements. Now, my colleague Tony here is going to take you through some of the solutions and approaches to addressing many of the things I've talked about.
Thank you, Jehan. So you just heard Jehan go over a lot of risks and a lot of potential hazards that can be present in your operations. And you're probably asking yourself, okay, well, how do I take care of all these? How do I find the time to do inspections? How do I find the time to do training? I'm busy and I'm growing cannabis and I'm focusing on my yield, or I'm busy processing in the lab and getting product out the door, or I'm in the retail facility and I'm servicing customers and selling products. So how am I going to get this done? So what I'll show you here in the next few slides is a potential solution. So at AuditPro, we have two things that help heavily regulated companies like companies in the cannabis industry. One is software and two is people. So from a software perspective, we automate the entire inspection process, the identification of issues, as well as the management of those issues to make sure that they get corrected, and finally the reporting. And then from a personnel perspective, we have environmental health and safety folks on staff who can provide training on site, develop training programs, develop safety programs, and also help with on-site inspections. Now let's focus in on the software. So there are two components to the software. And first, there's a mobile app, runs on any device, and this automates the inspections. So we have pre-built checklists that are tied to regulations and standards, and we have a checklist for your different type of facility or different type of operation. So there's a checklist for cultivation, for the labs, and for the retail operations. What's nice is all the questions, as I mentioned, are tied to regulations and standards, and it's a very easy to use tool that allows you to capture photos and notes to document any issues that you find. Here's an example of a checklist for a cultivation facility. So you can see it's very simple, plain language. Yet again, these questions are all tied to regulations and standards. And in this case, these are questions regarding pesticide. And as Jehan mentioned, pesticide is one of those potential risks, one of those potential hazards that we have in a cultivation facility. Here's an example of some questions from a processing checklist. Now, again, there's a lot that we cover in each of these checklists, but I just want to give you an idea of what we can track here. So again, very simple yes or no questions. And in this case, we're making sure that you look at the hazards, that you document them, that you identify them, and then that you identify the PP&E and make sure that your employees are using the PP&E appropriately and that they are trained on how to use that PP&E. And here's a checklist from a retail facility. So again, we have questions regarding training. We have questions regarding inventory control, regarding the labeling of products. So everything tied not only to your regulations, your state regulations, but also general safety questions around fire safety and electrical safety. After we complete those inspections, going through answering questions, yes or no, taking pictures and documenting with some notes, we submit the data and it all comes here to this dashboard. And automatically the software will identify any potential violations as well as provide you corrective actions. So we show you the date of the inspection, the corrective action as well as how to protect it, where this issue was found, a reference to the violation as well as pictures and notes. And if you see here, there's a dollar amount there, that's the potential fine value. So in this case, we know that OSHA issues fines. We track that to our questions in our regulations, and the potential fine value now, or the actual fine value now, is just over $13,000, and that's a fine for each issue. So if you happen to find 5 issues in your facility, all OSHA violations, then the fine could be 5 times $13,000. And I mentioned that you're able to track or capture photos, and so that you can really document the violations and make it easy for someone who's assigned to correct it to go out and do the correction, do the fix. So here you see there's a picture of an exit that is blocked by a cart. And we also have the ability to track reports so that you can trend your data. So here, this is a report that one of our clients ran, and it shows them their monthly compliance score. So this client was tracking the score at their 6 facilities. You can see the top 2 facilities scored 100 for that particular month, and they all did very well. And the bottom facility scored somewhere probably around 97, 98%. And so over time, they saw their compliance scores go up. Here's another report that, again, it's automatic, and so you have the ability here to track the score, the compliance score for a single facility over time. So you can see here that there was an inspection done in June, and they scored between 98 and 99, so it looks like 98.5%. And then the second inspection in June, they scored 100%. So you can see that you're able to show this improvement over time, and that will help you identify any potential issues so that you can work on those. So in summary, again, the solution here that AuditPro offers are 2. So 1 software and 2 personnel. So with the software, we automate the entire inspection process, the identification of issues, as well as reporting. So it takes very little time on your part, and you can quickly identify where you are at risk and what needs to be addressed. And then if you still need some additional help, we have EH&S staff that can come on site and not only provide training, but also on-site inspections and develop training and safety programs for you. If you'd like to reach either of us, here are our emails and websites. So you can reach out to us if you have any questions, if you'd like to set up a demo where we can show you the actual software in practice, or if you have any questions regarding anything within your facility and your operations and need some guidance on improving your safety and your compliance. So thank you all for your time. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Jehan, for an informative presentation. And also thank you to Heidolph and AuditPro for sponsoring today's webinar. We now have several minutes for questions. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box on the screen. Any questions we do not get to today will be answered via email. All right, let's get into it. All right, the first question we have is, does AuditPro keep up with changes to standards and regulations?
Hi, this is Tony. Yes, it does. So again, we track all questions to regulations and standards. Our team of EH&S personnel tracks those. So as there are changes to the regulations and the standards, we make the appropriate changes to the questions in the checklists.
Thank you. Next question. Is it possible to customize the system?
Hi, Tony again. Yes, it is. So what we find is that 80% of our clients use the system as is, and then the other 20% will customize it. And that can be in a number of ways. They might want to have some modifications made to the checklist, maybe something unique in their operation. Others will ask for an integration with some other systems, and so we've been able to do that as well. So the system is very flexible and it's easy to customize just depending on what the client requires.
Okay, give it one more minute. See someone typing. All right. Oh, another good question. I don't have Wi-Fi or cell phone signal in the cultivation space. Can I still use the app?
This is Jehan, and I've actually encountered that issue in both indoor and outdoor cultivation facilities, where, out in the middle of nowhere, you may not have Wi-Fi access. And so we were able to basically conduct it, and then once we got to Wi-Fi, it uploaded it to the system to generate the report. And maybe Tony can fill in a little details about that, but it worked for me out in the field.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Jehan. So the only time you need the Wi-Fi is when you log on initially. So whether you do that in the office or wherever you might be, again, it runs on a phone. So if you have cell service, you log in, and then you can go off anywhere and do your inspection, even in those areas where you do not have connectivity. And then complete it. Everything is saved. And then once you get back to where you are connected, you can upload the data.
Very useful. Another question we have is, what are other industries that your product can be used?
Yeah, so we work with very heavily regulated industries. In addition to cannabis, we work with a lot of research labs in universities, a lot of lab safety work that we do, also in biotech. And then we also do a lot of work in healthcare and food processing, food and beverage processing and manufacturing. So all of those are very heavily regulated. Safety and compliance are very important in those industries as well as others, but especially in these where they're scrutinized a lot by regulators. And so we work with those.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Last question would be, how long does it take to learn and use this product?
Yeah, so it's a very simple, easy to use product. When you saw the screenshots there, the checklists are plain language questions, very simple yes or no answers. So within a 30-minute training session, someone can be up and running and using the tool. We do provide ongoing support, and what we find is in the beginning, you'll get a fair number of questions just regarding about where certain things are found on a checklist. And then once folks start using it, we might get a few questions about reporting, and then it gets kind of quiet because they're off and they're running and they're using the tool pretty much without any support. And Jehan, you used it and you started from scratch. What was your experience?
It was relatively quick. I had been living in the analog world of paper-based checklists that were 30, 40 pages long with 120 criteria points on them. And I gotta say, either learning it in the same day and then conducting assessments was it was faster than already using the older system. So, and I've trained it to, trained other people who either work for third parties that do inspections or, that have government jobs and things like that. And the training is usually pretty quick, and then it's really easy to pick up. I mean, we all can take pictures with our phones and upload them to social media. I think that's it's very it flows very easily, and it's almost easier than using a paper-based system if you have a lot of criteria. So I found the learning curve to be really easy with it.
Excellent. And as a reminder, any questions that we didn't get to, because I see a few that came in that we're not gonna be able to get to today, we're gonna email you directly with answers to those. And also today's presentation is gonna be archived on the Heidolph Go to Stage platform, so you'll all be receiving a link to watch the presentation back. And then as an added bonus, everybody that registered for today's webinar will be receiving a corresponding blog post written by Dr. Jehan Marcoux. So that will be also in your email boxes later on today. So that concludes our webinar. Thank you all for being active in our presentation today, and be well.